LaTonya Yvette, welcome to this conversation with me. I'm so happy to be here with you tonight. We are here celebrating your amazing, and you're all going to hear about it, new book, Stand in My Window. LaTonya, for those of you who don't know her, is a multimedia storyteller who writes the newsletter With Love, L. LaTonya is the author of 3 books, including Stand in My Window, which was published this November 2024 by Penguin Random House and is also for sale back there. And I just devoured it, and I highly recommend you take one and devour it too. So welcome, LaTonya.
Thank you for having me. Thank you guys for being here. This is my, first step back into bookland, so it feels like such a warm space to be in.
So the first thing that I wanted to ask you was that in the prologue of this book, right away, you say that the way that you saw our bodies and our homes and the objects that are within them changed. It was upended was the word, through the course of making the book. So what was that like, and how did that work for you?
Oh, gosh, yeah. So I wrote the book from 2020 to 2023. So that was a long period of time. And I know it's hard to remember what was happening then, but we were in a different time period, and we were also responding to what happened before 2020, right? And so a lot of what I was exploring in the book then, even exploring as a person, was in response to everything that had happened the years prior. Obviously, we were in lockdown, there was so much going on, but personally, I really was growing up. And I think as I was exploring like my body and home and how people, specifically also how Black people have made home and have migrated for centuries and generations, I was sort of undone. And the book encompasses, this is sort of my like coming out. We've joked it's like, literary coming out, because the book encompasses a lot of research. And I was offered the space and time because we were home with our kids, even though it took many years. But also I was allowed to, because the book didn't have a shape yet, I was allowed to explore, and I was allowed to honestly let my brain do what it does, which is kind of go down rabbit holes and think and dream. But the other side of the dreaming was being disturbed, which is, it comes with the territory, I suppose. It's like, as much as you get inspired, the flip side of that is you will be bothered by something, and bothered by many things as you explore them. And I think for me, with writing this book in particular, I just was finding one thing after another, while simultaneously realizing that it wasn't just me. It was just people, and women especially, that have processed all of these things for years and years and generations before me. And it was interesting to feel like this was all new, but knowing that it actually by design wasn't new.
How was it that you settled on the topic of home?
So for women of color, I would say that book was all about style, and that it was definitely like this coffee table. I tried to move it into a space that was more hybrid. A lot of people love that book, so if I downplay that book, people literally will come for me, like in my email, like, I don't like the way you talked about your book, because it does have like
to
die
be kind
hard.
to your children.
Yeah, it does have like, yes, exactly. The book does have like die hard like fans and people who supported it, but I just have to like preface, like, I'm always trying to make the distinction between the two books. One was, this allowed me to be able to get into a space that is often gated. Women of color allowed that, right? But it was about style. It did have components of hair. It did have things, stories about like what I wore in different parts of my life. And home was a part that was completely taken out. It was on the table originally when I first was thinking about that book. And then as I began to write it, I realized that I was not aware enough to go there. What happened eventually was Brett Kavanaugh was there was all these conversations about him, and a lot of the conversations with my girlfriends changed. We started to talk about what we did in our homes, how we felt safe, how we didn't feel safe, what we brought along with us, what we didn't bring along with us, who we allowed in. And I realized that every time something happened on one scale, our conversations would shift intimately. We would talk about something different. And that's why this book ended up being about home in that way, because once the floodgates opened, I would say, on like a larger scale, women got more, I think, open about actually what happened in their home and what happened to them in their home. And that's a little bit of what I talked about in the introduction is these shifts.
Yeah. I think one of the things that's really, when I listen to that and when I hear you say that, one of the things that I hear is like, I think it's a natural progression for women. You like, as you're forming an identity, you dress yourself, right? And then as you learn how to articulate yourself through your style, I think there's a natural extension of that in your home, right?
Yeah.
And so I see that as a progression that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So how do you see that progression working for you, and how has it worked for you over the course of making this transition from one book to another?
Yeah. It's interesting because now you pointed that out. I thought of like my grandmother, who was like super stylish, but like cared deeply about her home. Like it was her apartment. It was the thing. And I thought about my mother, who like had her own stories of style, but cared deeply about our house. She was also an interior designer at one point in her life. So home and style have always been in conversation for me. And I think it is a little bit of like growing up as a woman, like, and coming into, I think, my own womanhood. And a little bit of it too is developing new language, and developing different forms of language, and finding the ways that we can speak about something. Because it's hard to talk about stand in my window if you see me kind of thinking and kind of being off in my head, because it kind of goes into so many different streets.
Yeah.
And it kind of goes into so many different spaces. But when you think about, I think a lot of the book is rooted in my body and our bodies in space. And those two things are always in communication with one another. They're always telling each other stories.
Well, so your mom and your grandmother factor heavily into Stand in Your Window, and in this really beautiful way. And the first, when you were talking, you reminded me that the first moment where I was really like touched by a story about your mom and her sense of style was, there's a section of the book where you guys are shopping. Shopping is a relative term. You're looking for a new apartment, and your mom goes into this apartment and she says that your dad can do the floors.
Yeah.
Right. And tell me about that moment, and tell me about like kind of why that moment was striking for you enough to put it in the book.
So I tried to, it's hard to like encapsulate my mom into a book. She's this whole figure, and it's hard to encapsulate her, the version of her that existed when I was a child, which was the person who could make anything happen, right? And that's just not like, oh, like I love my mom. My mom could, no, my mom, everyone was scared of my mom, and my mom could make anything happen, right? Like she just had this, she could just do it, and she would just make it happen like the next day. And I grew up with this idea, like magical thinking, kind of, despite things being like difficult or we were struggling. My mom made me believe that anything was possible at any given moment. And like, it didn't really matter. Whatever was happening didn't matter. And I think a little bit of, that moment with my dad, and I was just trying to, I think, think of James Baldwin's quote, it was like, just make it clean. And I was like, how do I just get one line about my mom that is clear, like that, like just shows who she is, or, and who she was specifically back then, without explaining so much. And that was that for me. It was just like, she just knew who could do what and how quick it could be done. And there was no questioning, it's no questioning her. It was just the way that it was.
What was so interesting to me about it was like, the way that you describe it, it's like her mom walks into this place, and it's like she sees the potential. She sees what's possible, and she's like immediately goes into the mode that I think a lot of us do, where you're like, you're like the producer of your life, and
Yeah.
you're like, this is what's possible. But what's
Yeah.
really interesting about the way you described it, I'm going to read the quote because it's really amazing. Throughout my childhood, my mother's practice of making things nice maddened me, especially if we were in the middle of an eviction process.
Yeah.
And I wanted to hear about that because the word maddening was really striking, because I think we all find our moms maddening, right? And a lot of times you find your mom maddening from their power. So what was it that maddened you about her?
She was powerful.
Yeah.
She was powerful, and also I thought delusional, but it was powerful. Like believing in something beyond a single moment. That is powerful, magical thinking. And that is literally what gets you through every single season of life. And I think that is like what I'm trying to make clear, despite our own difficulties and beauties of like our mother-daughter relationship. My mom really embedded in me this idea of like, there is something always beyond a single moment. And there's energy in every single thing that we do, every single object that we bring in our home, every wall that we paint, every person we let in, every meal we eat. There is energy and there's an exchange there. And you have to believe in that. And like she really believes like in it and believed in it like when I was a kid. And it allowed me to, I think also a little bit of like believe in humanity. Yeah. Because if you think so beyond a single moment, then you're allowed to just like, I don't know, believe that people are wonderful and kind and just, you know?
So there's so many things about this book that like really touched me and I feel really connected to. Like I was showing LaTonya, it's like full of underlines and whatever. But I think that concept of what you're just saying and the way that you tether that throughout the book to objects and to both objects and also the places that house those objects.
Yeah.
I think that really has something about it, and the way you talk about that is really interesting. And one of the other quotes that really jumped out about your mom and your grandma is you talked about your mom as, your grandma rather, as when she went to a thrift store, this was like the world's most glamorous department store, right? Yeah. Which I think, what do you make of that now as an adult? Like, how do you see that relationship to abundance? Because that's yeah.
I was actually thinking about it because like there was all this like there's a lot of conversations on like like boycotting tomorrow Friday, and I was like, well, if we also all are so aware of our use and are thinking actually in a mode of sustainability constantly, which is like what back then I didn't have any idea what my grandmother was like saying to me, but literally like it's hard even to articulate, and I think that's the beauty of the book, like what sustainability like means, but actually it's like was part of our living, right? Which was like everything. It wasn't just about like we didn't have the funds. It was actually like a life choice, and it was about like a community choice, right? And it was an individual decision and an individual sort of compass. And I think it was sort of like you could be indulgent with the things without them breaking you. And as an adult, it has like totally moved my entire life because we don't need as much as we think we need. Right. And that's what my grandmother taught me. It was like, actually, there is magic in every single thing that we already have. And we don't need as much as we think we need.
And the having of amazing things is not about money or...
No, it's about storytelling.
Yes.
It's about what stories those things tell you and what stories you can tell with those things. And like, I think the beauty of my grandmother was you would come into her apartment and there was everything had a story.
So yes, for sure. Right. So I was actually, you walked in here tonight and you were like, I'm wearing, she looks amazing. Right. Oh, and she was like, I'm wearing this dress from the RealReal. Right. So you're in a RealReal store. Right. Yeah. And one of the things I got from your grandma was
which my kids picked out. My kids picked this dress out at the RealReal store one random day in the city for me and was like, you're going to wear this on a date. And I have not worn it on a date, but I've worn it tonight, which counts.
So question was, when your kids were like, you're going to wear this on a date, were you like, yeah? Or you were like, hell no, that's not what I'm wearing on a date?
I was like, yeah, I trust them.
Yeah.
I trust their thinking. Like they're magic.
Did you have a sense of why they thought that dress? Like, did you feel like
They know my body.
Totally.
Do you know what I mean? So it's sort of like they know my body, which is like a cool thing about kids. Like they're just like, oh, I know her. Like, which is like, they're like, she's good, and we allow you to wear that.
I do agree. When my daughter like gives me the side eye, I'm like, okay, moving on. We're going and we're turning around.
Yeah.
Okay, so like, talk to me a little bit then about, so your grandma approaches the thrift store like the world's most glamorous department store, which is also how I approach a thrift store.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about walking into somewhere, a store. Like, what kind of shopper are you? What do you feel when you walk in? Like, what is your radar like? What do you feel like when you walked in here tonight? Like, did you have?
I'm a scanner. I scan. So it's like I can pull up, like this is my brain. I can pull, like I'll just pull up something like that. But then I can like see something and just have it. But maybe that's like the old stylist in me. You know what I mean? Like that's like part of my history. I can see something, pull it, and like know exactly where how it looks. And if it's not for me, I know who it's for.
So I want to pause on that because I think that that's something.
It's like a little bit of a thing.
Tell me about that because I think that radar for like picking the thing and then knowing who it is matched to, who its perfect fit is, or its partner, or its whatever. Like, pause on that and go slower. Like, tell me what that feels like and why you know that. Like, try and break it down.
It's so funny. It's all a feeling. It's all a feeling. It's all about reading a space, reading people, reading a room correctly. And I think we spend so much time like filling spaces with noise and talk, and like we don't actually allow ourselves to like read something correctly in our bodies. And that's a little bit of like my like woo woo whatever, but I can like walk in and read something, and I think we need to allow one another and ourselves and like the opportunity to read something correctly.
Where and how do you feel like you learned that? Like when you think back on your experience as a kid and with your grandma and the way you developed your own aesthetic, like what was like the pivotal moments where you're like, oh yeah.
I mean, it's probably was at first a trauma response. It probably was. And then I evolved it to be a healthy thing. But knowing how to, I think, read a space is like a little bit of a trauma response, which is like, let's be 100 with it. But also, I think it's something that I developed more in my womanhood, just because I'm aware of my body and a little bit of like, the book is broken out into meditation. So it's broken out into an inhale and exhale. The exhale goes first and the inhale is after. And the whole point is to be on purpose, right? Sometimes we need to like breathe out before we breathe in, even though that's not the way it all works. And a little bit of that is sort of like the beginning starts with desahogad, which is like to undrown. And so we need to like breathe out and let the things out before. And a little bit of that, like, being able to read something is my meditation practice. And
totally.
Like being able to like be in my body.
So one of the things that also really resonates with me about the book is this idea of the connection between trauma and noticing and then beauty, actually. Can you talk a little bit about the connection between trauma and beauty, or what you just started talking about? You just started talking about this idea that like in many ways figuring out how to claim these things actually first comes from noticing. So talk more about that, 'cause I think that's something that's so true in the world, but people really don't talk about that. Like style and trauma, not like, it's not like you're like sitting on a fashion blog and everyone's like, let's talk about style and trauma.
Yeah, they want to act like it doesn't exist.
They do, but actually I really lands for me that they're completely connected. So talk about that a little more.
Well, I always, in Women of Color, it starts off my first book with talking about how clothes were armor at some point, right? And I think that I was able to kind of express that. And there's a lot of like style stories in which people are expressing that clothes can be a way to tell a story, but they also can be armor and a way to protect yourself. And it's hard to explain. I think what we're learning now, or what people are learning collectively, and what we've always, and people, and Black people in particular too, have always known, is that the pain is connected to the joy. And I've been singing lately like this, this song is like joy and pain, joy
Yeah.
and pain. And I just like singing it with my kids and I'm just, because it's just life. And I think the more we're open and honest about that duality, the more we can appreciate the joy. And I think, one of the things that is important is to like take note and to notice. And I wish I had like a clearer answer as far as like, it is important to our not only survival, but our like ability to thrive is to be clear when something bad is happening and to write it down, to pay attention to it, and to equally be clear when something beautiful and joyful is happening.
I also see a lot in your book what I think happens a lot, which is that beauty provides a language or a way to reclaim identity or reclaim space or reclaim place. And a lot of what happens in the book, I feel like, is so much about looking at that. How do you use the aesthetic world? So like in your mind, like dressing yourself or decorating a home, like what happens for you in those places when you make it beautiful again?
Yeah. For me, what happens, it's a lot of it's like reclamation, right? It's like a sort of a way to be empowered. And I think that that's a little bit of what, I'm trying to, if I'm making an offering and stand in my window, I want people to feel like we do like have the power. Like that is your individual freedom. Like you have the power to like make something beautiful. You have the power to like, you have the right to be free and to exist into anybody, any space. And I think it's hard, right? Because like, I wrote the book, but the book is not mine, so it's hard to like, I think a lot of what I'm offering in the book is what I want people to take with them. And that is like, it is important to recognize that we have individual power and we can write a different story.
I think that's right. And I think that aesthetics, beauty, clothes, the things you put in your home, those are all tools for doing that. And I think people that have experienced trauma, I think there's a finely tuned understanding of that.
Yeah, it's just, and I think what's interesting is it's been, as I've gotten older, I've had to like find it's easy for me to write it. It's easier for me to write it and explain it. And like with all this research, it's harder for me to speak to people about it. But I think so much of what people don't have the words for now or don't have the tools to like exist in now is they actually have never experienced paying attention to both.
It's the paying attention.
Yeah.
Yes, I think it is the noticing. So to like bring it back around to then how you dress yourself and how you approach creating a home. How is the sort of experience of making a home changed over the course of both writing this book and you evolving as a mother and a woman?
Oof. It's interesting because like also I don't evolve alone, right? Like I have a 14-year-old and a 10-year-old. So like my living spaces and how I evolve is like, I evolved, but these people also evolved.
Totally.
So,
Yes.
when they were younger, I was in charge and I was making things beautiful with them. And now I make things beautiful often for other people at the house. So, or for other companies or anything. And in our home, I think I'm negotiating. That's what I'm doing. That's what I'm spending a lot of time doing. I'm negotiating and I'm trying to teach them, at the same time, how to make things beautiful. So it's an interesting, I'm evolving by learning that I'm not an individual. Like I have to negotiate as a person with people who I don't think make any sense. But
I think this can apply to children, boyfriends, ex-boyfriends, girlfriends.
Anybody.
Like get that table out of my house.
Yeah, like we're literally constantly moving things together.
Yes.
And I think the biggest thing is, and what I, talk about in the book is I think it's been really, really important that my kids are so deeply involved in my thinking behind something. Yeah. And even doing the House of State, they like planted the wildflowers, they painted walls, they cleaned stuff. They have an idea of like, like it's embedded in them, that they have a deep understanding of shared design and space.
So let's talk about that. The arc of the book, if I could sort of summarize,
Yeah.
right, is that you are writing this book about home.
Yeah.
In the middle, and you correct me if
Yeah,
the
go
synopsis
ahead.
is not, but you're writing a book about home.
Yeah.
You're in an apartment in Brooklyn.
Yes.
You find out as you get this book advanced that apartment in Brooklyn is
No, I was closing on the house. So I had
That's
this
when you found
idea.
out. Okay,
Yeah.
you
I had
tell the
this
story.
No. Okay. So I was.
Give me the arc.
Okay. So I sold this book. We hadn't known what summer of 2020 was at that point. Like the book was being sold. So it was already on the table. The book also didn't have a format yet. And the book was about to go into final, like literally we're signing the papers. I think I signed them. And then I get this random letter that like I have to leave my apartment, which is what we're in at that same time. But the letter was like so like illegally delivered. It was just like not right. And I think what I'm trying to make clear in the book was that like, you know, I had moved around. I had unstable housing as a kid my whole entire life, and we were not about to move upstate. And I already gave the bank the damn money, so I couldn't take it back, and I wasn't going to move my kids. But also, it was interesting because we actually weren't supposed to be like evicted at that time. Like there was a moratorium. Like there was no way that we were supposed to be, you know, moved. And it was interesting because it became this larger conversation in research. While I was like designing that house, I was simultaneously fighting to stay in our apartment. And I wanted to be so careful in writing the book that I did not, and I hate the word privileged because like I bought the house by myself, right? That's like another story. But at the same time, I wanted to be careful because it was a privilege to be able to buy the house.
So, and for just so you guys that haven't read the book yet, the house upstate you bought with the book advance from the book, and it was a house that was actually intended to be a retreat, correct?
Yes,
like,
exactly, like a residency.
Residency, right?
Yeah.
So you were building this space not just for you but for others.
Yeah, like it was never supposed to be mine. It was always supposed to be shared, and that's a lot of the research of the book. That's sort of those two things were happening at the same time, but also cut to this letter that was like, you got to also get out your apartment. And by the way, at that moment in New York, in Brooklyn in particular, there were no apartments. No one was moving. We had there was nowhere to go. So it was interesting space to be in because also no one knew what was happening. Like I didn't tell anybody. No one knew until the court case was literally done in 2023 that like this actually was happening at the same time.
But it opened up a lot of spaces in that book.
1000%.
The space in that book that's opened by that and the places
1000%.
it takes you to talk about it. So there's another really amazing anecdote in the book about you have this pillowcase that you like carried around your whole childhood, right? Tell them what happened to the pillowcase.
Oh my God. Okay. So like I have this, it's like my night, it's called my night. Like, and it's like the thing that I've held on to my entire, well, there's been a few new ones of it. But I think the case was about to be we were closing the case in the Brooklyn apartment, but the heat went off. The heat didn't go off. They turned off the heat. Yeah, they turned off the heat. It's the dead of winter. It was really bad. It was just a whole situation, which it's also insane. And we moved to my friend's house, my friend's apartment temporarily, and we literally just found the apartment that we're in now. And so it was an interesting sort of thing. Again, believing magic, ask for what you want, it will appear, right? And so we just were about to move, but it was a week delay. And we go to my friend's house to stay for a little bit. And we're, by the way, at this point considered homeless, even though we have the house up, there's somebody staying there. Our apartment here our stuff is there. We don't have we don't have really anywhere to go. And so we're at my friend's place and I lose the pillowcase.
Well, you only bring a couple of things with you, right?
You only bring a couple things.
A handful of things.
Yeah. And we send the cats to my friend's house and we stay at my other friend's house, and in our process of then moving to our apartment, I lose this pillowcase, which I cannot find. And a little bit of it too, for me, I think at the end of it was you get to rewrite a different story. You don't need the old comforts to see you through. And it was interesting because, like, thank God for this apartment. It is exactly what we needed, what we wanted. Like, I don't even know, like, it was a blessing.
So I think this concept of objects
yeah.
that are lost or loss in general
Yeah.
is very...
Which we talk about also in the book. I say we, but it's like me, my brain, and all the
Yes.
people who live there.
We all have a lot of people that live in our
Like,
brains, let's be
whoever
honest.
she was.
Let's be honest. There are lots of selves.
Yeah.
So I think this idea of loss is potential, is what I hear in what you just said, right? And like, so
it leaves room.
So when do you know about getting rid of something or losing something? When do you know it's time to move on from things? In this case, you weren't making the choice, but you embraced the reality. You were like, okay, this happened. But like, loss leads to possibility, right? So when do you move through? When do you know to move through? Does it come?
I always like have these. I'm so crazy. I have a visual. I'm thinking of Nina Simone. It's all a feeling. It's just a feeling. It's just a feeling. You just know it's time to go. It's just a feeling. So I think that's a little bit of it too. Is like the thing is no longer telling you the same story, and I think you have to. And I think that's what it means. Like I think that's also why the book is broken up into these meditations, because you have to pay. Like when you meditate, you listen. And you pay attention to your body, you pay attention to like the sounds, and you really like kind of go into a different space. And if you are really in it, you will hear other things.
And I think that it's a challenging thing to say to someone, like, you just have to have just to break it down to a simple thing.
Yeah.
Like, how do I get dressed in the morning? I don't know what the hell to wear. And be like, it's just, you got to feel it. And your people are like, can you give me something more concrete than that? But actually what you're saying is what's behind that, which is that feeling it is actually, there are a lot of things that happen before you feel it, right?
Yeah.
And those things are noticing, and those things are all the things you're talking
paying
about.
attention. I think the thing is it's like such a lost art to pay attention. Like to really pay attention, like pay attention to one another, pay attention to someone's body, pay attention to like what we're hearing, pay attention to like the way a room looks, the space, the lining of the shelves, the hair on your friend's head. Like just paying attention is really lost. And we're so busy trying to control and trying to fill in. And I say this, I'm in part of the like that we're not really paying attention.
That resonates with me so much in the sense that like we could talk about that in a way that's about meditation or about presence in a room or about being in a conversation with another person.
Yeah.
But I think we can also talk about it as it relates to being in the material world,
yes,
right? And that's
for
what's so, there's something in your book that ties those two things together in such a powerful way, right? Like noticing is actually experiencing, and I think there's something about noticing that brings more beauty, because if
1000%.
you are there to see it, then you see it.
Yeah, I think you also allow things to have a greater presence. You're not, again, that's what we're talking about, like sustainability and not being overindulgent. It's like you actually are just paying attention as part of that.
Yeah, and noticing what you like.
Yeah.
So there's a passage in the book that I really loved and found very moving and kind of encapsulated crazily sort of where we arrived in this conversation. Lucky for us. Here we are. So I was going to ask you to read it. Are you cool with that?
Woo,
really beautiful.
Shake it off. Okay.
All right. So you know where you're starting.
Okay. Where do I go? Okay. This one. There. Okay. And then
you go wherever.
Okay.
She goes wherever she wants, actually. But
that's where you're. Okay. Okay. Good.
So let's do it.
It's also so funny reading work that's like from a period of time and you're like, I'm not there, but I'm there and it's yours now. It's not mine, but I guess I'm gonna do it. It's nice though. Okay, let's see if I can do both. Okay. The garage next to the house is nearly as big as the house itself, with Virginia creepers crawling on its back and poison ivy starting to make its way in the bike casing behind it. It has 2 floors and 1,000 square feet of good beams. Good beams as bones. It also has a loft and an oversized hay window, which could be opened from the top after removing a 4x4 piece of wood from its latches. A few years back, someone had begun to insulate the space, but presumably stopped when they realized how difficult of a job it would be for just one person with a pipe dream. They added kitchen counters and cabinets on the bottom floor and a tall cabinet that now hosts the several cans of paint waiting to be used on the main portion of the house. There's some kind of pump that was likely used for a wood-burning stove that warmed the room. From the outside, it is just a garage. From the inside, it is someone's half-finished project, waiting years for another person to pick up from where they left off. In my mind, it is a kitchenette, a daybed layered in cream sheepskin, layers of Moroccan rugs tucked under the elephant feet, a cherry-trimmed 70s styles glass table, and Eames-inspired chairs to sit in the middle. Upstairs, I see open bleached beams and finished foam insulation. Bookshelves with Tony, Sonia, Maya, Joan, Alice, Audrey, and Lucille sitting stately. And then there is a large desk, sitting beside the hay window fitted with glass, mirroring the window directly across the room. The desk is lined in popsicle stick-sized beams of light, streaming from the 3 skylights that cool the raised ceilings in the summer and heat it with the sun in the winter. I see the mountains watching over me as they surely watched over every other project that once began and ended in this space. Of all the many projects on the list to create and renovate at the May House, it was strange that the studio, more specifically the desk, became of primary importance to me. For one, the house needed to be renovated quickly to become available as a rental in the BIPOC residency I was planning for. Anyways, much of my writing is done during weekdays when I would be in Brooklyn. Still, I could almost smell the burning wood rising from the bottom floor, or the fresh black coffee I would brew twice over in the Chemex on the desk next to the books and under the window, with a tarnished silver spoon of honey drip, drip, dripping beside it. Yeah, oh my gosh, yeah.
What do you feel when you read that now?
It's interesting because I didn't renovate that space, but but it was the first thing. And I think a little bit of it is the preciousness of dreaming and of imagining. And even if you don't actually do it, the beauty of holding on to making something real, and I think that is like holding on to something is beautiful. It's powerful. And I don't know what, like being a writer is also weird because you're like, that was fun writing that. And I was like, who's that girl? Like, I know her. I think I know her, but it's nice. It's nice to remember a dream and to be like, oh, I still hold it somewhere, even though it didn't happen yet. Like, it's still there. It's also what keeps me tethered to the house.
And also, I think that dream, you put that dream in that book. And for me, that was very vivid for me in terms of how I move through the world thinking about spaces and objects and things and how they offer me language and possibility to imagine what's possible.
Yeah.
And that when I read that, you gave me that. And so whether you do that or not, by writing it, you're giving it to all of us.
Yeah. Thank you. That's the beauty of writing a book. It's an offering.
Wow. I really enjoyed it. So maybe with that seems like a nice place to stop for a sec. But I adore this book, and I know you will too. And please pick it up back there. And I'm curious if any of you have any questions for LaTonya.
Whitney.
Here you go. It's not a question. I want to express my gratitude.
Oh my gosh.
I was a recipient of your BIPOC residency, and I stayed at the May House.
Yes.
During, what was that, 2021? It was like a very pivotal time in society and for me, I was fresh off of a separation of a 7-year marriage, and I was mother of a young child. So the fact that I had this house to myself for 4 full days was a miracle. And I just remember like the journey getting to the house was so easy. Like my Uber driver was so kind, even though he's complaining about all these new transplants moving into this town. And I was like, well, yeah, but like this is a home that's owned by a Black woman, so shut up, you know. But also like once I got there, I was just struck by the intentionality of the placement of the objects, like the way I'm a Taurus, so I'm like very into like comfort and immediately when I stepped into the home, I felt with every fiber of my being, the intentionality that you put into that space. And you're
cry.
Yeah, don't cry. I mean, cry, it's fine. I was crying low-key, but I ended up like doing a little photo shoot there because you have this like long wooden kitchen table and then this like beautiful pendant light that was reminiscent of Carrie Mae Weems' kitchen table series.
Yeah,
And
the fact that you picked that up.
the fact that the fact that I actually did that photo shoot for myself. I set up a camera and it was the first time I felt like in my body after giving birth. It was the first time that I felt beautiful after giving birth. It was the first time that I felt like just like this ability to reclaim like the parts of me that I felt like I had lost. And then I ended up like, you know, just like cooking myself the most delicious meals and like, you know, taking a bath in that beautiful clawfoot tub in the master bedroom. I mean, the primary bedroom upstairs. And then I wrote a book proposal while I was there. So it was just like, you know, thank you for providing that space and for, you know, just not investing in something just for yourself, but for community. And the fact that I'm able to pay it forward is really a blessing. So thank you.
Thank you for staying there. It made me so happy that you were there and that you got it. I think it's so hard for me to articulate like the different parts of the house and what each part means and the layers of like maybe an art brain and also like design or whatever in the story. And so I remember seeing that because Carrie Mae Weems, like for me also it's like a godmother, you know, all, and like when you did the photos, I was like, oh my God, she got it. And I didn't say anything. And I think that's the beauty of like having language exist and having objects speak to people differently and different times and hoping that it comes across and figuring out how it translates to you it's wonderful to hear. Thank you.
Who else?
Okay, well, I remember when I was living upstate and it was like right before you, or maybe at the same time you bought your house. No, it was right after you bought your house. I remember I messaged you and I was like, I'm terrified to move up there. Like, I don't know what it's going to be like for a Black woman. And I was pregnant. So I was trying to like have access to nature and feel closer to what I thought would be more like, I don't know, equitable living, like just make more sense financially, but also like be in a space that someone can feel connected to the world around them. Because New York is heady. Like you're not so connected all the time. You're like running and in a concrete neighborhood built like years ago, like centuries ago. And it's old and it's beautiful, but it's not, I don't think it's always like conducive to raising a child. And I think now having a child here in New York City, like I do think it is, but like at the time I was terrified. So I messaged you. I was like so excited to be up there, and you were like, "Yeah, I don't know." Like you were like, "I love my house, but I don't know. Like I don't know what it's like to be up here full time, and like I'm excited to explore it." But how has your perception of upstate and like your relationship with upstate changed, and also like, why did you choose to do this?
Yeah, that's such a good question.
I love it so much. I just always wondered, like, what was your decision-making process?
Yeah, you know, so at the time, okay, so I'll just start from the last question, which is, you know, at the time, my grandmother was born and raised in Brooklyn. My mom was born and raised in Brooklyn. Owning anything, which is like I said in an interview when I first bought the house, is like not a thing. It's like we just don't do that, right? And I think that was like a lot of my being a single woman, being an artist. I was like, well, what if I can? Like, who actually said I can? And my mom, of course, like made me believe it was possible, but I think a little bit of it too was I just wanted to challenge the ideas. And I think, particularly with the house, and I had read Braiding Sweetgrass twice one summer. And so I was also very interested in like shared land and like the history of it and the reclamation of it as a Black woman. So that's what it was for me back then. Of course, it evolved and was sharing space and it became this whole idea. And now I'm like pulling it back and we're moving it and whatever. And now, I just was up there just this past weekend with Oak and we both were like, oh, why don't we come up here more? I think of the house as the house. I don't think of the house is upstate, but I don't really have and to Whitney's point, it's just so, the point of that house in particular, it was on the train line. I don't drive. So it was like, it had to be on the train line. It had to be accessible. I wanted the body to feel like it was transitioning out from the city. And that was like a huge part for me. And right now the house is still like this magic space. And it's actually sort of this bubble. Like it feels like this bubble and it feels like it holds all the energy of everyone who's came to visit and gets to stay and gets to make things there. And so when we go there, it's like an island. We don't really get off the island, even though it's accessible. Like we have coffee, we have pizza there, we have all these things. We kind of stay there like it's like a little island. And I think that's the magic of it. It's still such a healing place, but my relationship to it has evolved as I've evolved, and it's just a magical place. It's hard to describe it, but I don't know if I like upstate in particular. I just don't. But I think the house is I think the house is magical though. Like it just has really good energy. It has really good energy, and it's just like a child.
Houses really do, right?
Yeah.
I relate to that. The idea that you can really love a house and not care at all where it is.
I don't.
It's like
I like the house
its
can get
own
on wheels
universe.
and move
Yeah.
somewhere else, and the house would be the house.
Totally. Anybody else? Maybe one more. Betty?
Yeah.
Just because I'm sitting next to Whitney, so I'm like, I don't know if it's awkward, two people in the same corner talking at the same time. Anyway, hi. I was really piqued when you were saying that we don't pay attention.
As somebody who doesn't pay attention, I've had to force myself to pay attention. So thank you.
So part of even as you said that, then I immediately had the flashback when you said your mom was Delulu. Mm-hmm. And I promise I'm going somewhere with this, but in the paying attention, when you're like noticing the details and you're noticing the true nature and outline of something, whether it's an object or whether was before you, so nature or someone, right? Because when you see a piece, you can be like, okay, this will fit this silhouette, and I know the exact person that this will look good on. I would love to hear from you what your when I say spell, I mean like your offering.
That actually, I hear you.
You hear me?
Mm-hmm.
What's your spell for us right now in where we're being robbed of our attention and we're being priced out of our safetyness, like our home? So when you said a potential eviction, I moved 3 times in the course of 2020 and 2023 in Bed-Stuy, 3 times with my partner and my child.
Yeah.
So what's your spell for us,
Yeah.
to repeat again, when we're being robbed of our attention and being consumed in that way?
Yeah. Such a good question, because I was saying to my friend the other day, I was like, my greatest fear is like having to move again. Like I live with that, and so I get it. And like I wake up like, who's paying the rent? Oh, I am. You know what I mean? like it is a fear. It's like, oh wait, God, I'm in charge of doing this thing. And it's a fear. It is like, I'm already 9 months out when my lease has to be renewed. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm already there. And so that is a huge thing. But I've been honestly thinking, and I said this about the house is an island. I think our apartments are lives. I said to somebody the other day, like, think about it like my block. What can you, and so I've said to my kids all the time, my block, like this is my block right now. Like this is basically, my arms can only reach on my block. So we're going to only take care of our block right now. And I don't literally mean that like you only take care of your neighbor because your neighbor might have more money. What I mean is think about how far you can go and don't go any further than that. And that really is refining your span, like your reach, and refining what you hear, what you listen to. I think a little bit of, and it gets at the end of the book, is like I got really deep in like Al-Anon in the end of in 2020, 2021. And a lot of it has allowed me to like also stop listening to gossip, stop listening to like, and that those are, and I say that because what happens is your attention shifts, right? They said, let there be no gossip, no crosstalk, right? And what it's like, you just pay attention, you bring it in. And so the idea of like my block is how far you can reach, how far your brain can go, how far can your arms go, right? So you can only go as far as you can actually go. And you can only help as far as you can help. And I really think that that is what is going to allow us to take care of one another. That's going to allow us to be sane. And I say this as someone who quite literally is like, I have 9 months in this apartment. I'm going to be the best tenant so they give me another year. Like, but that's like me not thinking about my block. So I have to call it back in. Right. And so that concept, I've been sharing it around, like, just take it, like what, but just think about how far you can go. And really call it in and let there be no gossip, no crosstalk, but let us grow into each other one day at a time, and so that's the only thing I could offer.
That's a beautiful spell. You do your
one
thing.
day at a time. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that we are at time, but I have
Thank
loved,
you.
as I
Oh my
always do,
gosh.
talking with you.
It was hard not to look in your eyes
I
and
know,
go like this.
And I've loved to be here with all of you, and I love what you guys said. It was so powerful and amazing. All of you really interesting and gave me like 17,000 other things I want to talk to you about. So
Yes.
maybe we're gonna have to have another chapter.
Yes, we'll do another version.
Yes.
Just I would love to. Thank you all for being
Thank
here.
you guys.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Stand in my window. It like rocked my last 2 weeks. So
Yes, and the books are provided by McNally Jackson. You can buy them. I was like, I'm not signing nothing, but I'll sign the book. Yeah, thank you guys for being here.
if you sign them, we all can keep talking, which I'm kind of into.
Ooh, I like
right.
that. Y'all just hang out and drink. There's drinks too.
Yes.
If you drink, you don't have to drink. Okay.
Thank you all for being here.